Welcome. My name is Paulette Murray, and I'm with the National Archives and Records Administration Records Management Training Team. Today we have Ms. Cindy Smolovic with us. She is the supervisor of the Records Management Oversight Office. This office conducts inspections, assessments, and evaluations of federal records management programs. Welcome, Cindy.
Good morning, thank you.
NARA resumed inspecting agency records management programs in 2010. What is the purpose of the inspection program, and why does NARA inspect agencies?
The National Archives and Records Administration inspection program is part of NARA's oversight responsibilities under federal regulations. So we inspect agencies to ensure that they are complying with records management regulations, and also to find out different trends and things that agencies may need to do to improve their programs, something that's going well in one program that might also help another program.
How does NARA select agencies for inspections?
The regulations under 36 CFR 1239 have specific criteria on picking agencies for inspections. These criteria include whether the agency has significant historical records that NARA needs to have transferred to our National Archives. We look for agencies that may have some media attention dealing with records management issues. We also look at agencies that have come to us and asked for an inspection, or agencies where we know they have had some issues in the past.
How does NARA determine the goals and scope of each agency inspection?
Each agency inspection is targeted to that specific agency. So when we develop our inspection plan, we decide which part of that agency that we need to look at, which part of that agency deals with specific records perhaps. One inspection that we did recently for NASA, we knew that NASA was closing down the shuttle program, and so we focused our inspection specifically on just that body of records. So we do our scope and tailor it to a particular issue that we're looking at.
How exactly are the inspections conducted?
Normally, once we decide which agency we're going to inspect, we develop a comprehensive inspection plan. We develop specific questions that need to be addressed by the agency, the records officer, and their program staff. The regulations require that NARA notify the head of the agency when we do an inspection, so there's a letter that goes from the Archivist of the United States to the head of that agency. We will informally work initially with the records officer to help develop different criteria, develop an inspection plan, site visits, get their input on where we need to go, who we need to speak to in their agency, and then we will do a formal in-briefing. Usually this consists of the records officer and any program staff that that person feels needs to be in the room. Occasionally we will also be meeting with executives of that agency if they wish. Once we get started, we talk both to the records officer and records coordinators, program staff, people who create the records. We ask them specific questions on how they're maintaining the records. Specifically with electronic records, we may be working with their IT personnel so that we can ask them specific questions on how they are maintaining those records, both temporary and permanent, to ensure that they are being maintained for however long that they need to, as well as for the permanent records, what they need to do to transfer them to us.
What are the expected deliverables from each inspection, and how do these ultimately benefit the records management programs and the staff of the agencies being inspected?
The inspection report is the final deliverable from our agency to the agency being inspected. Inside this report we'll have recommendations and findings based on what we determined while we were on site visiting agency personnel. The inspection findings and recommendations are based specifically on the questions that we've asked, and we hope that what we come up with will help them with solutions to develop methods to improve their programs. We also, when we find agencies that are doing something really well, we highlight those, and we also try to find ways to connect what's going well at that agency and bring that to other federal agencies as well. Our inspection reports are published to our website, And so they are available to the public as well as other federal agencies to look at them. And that's hopefully how other agencies will also be able to benefit from an inspection that may be targeted to one agency, but they can see similarities in their own program and help them find ways that they can also improve their programs.
Since 2009, NARA has requested that agencies annually complete and return a records management self-assessment questionnaire, also known as the RMSA. What is the RMSA and what is its purpose?
The RMSA is, as you mentioned, an annual questionnaire based on a core set of questions and some other follow-up information gathering questions that NARA uses to determine the level of compliance in records management, regulations and statutes, as well as how agencies are handling certain practices that ensure long-term preservation of their records for however long is needed by their retention schedules. The records management self-assessment is scored on a 0 to 100 scale, and then the scores are then grouped into categories of high, moderate, and low risk. And these risk categories determine how well an agency is doing in maintaining their records so that they can find the information when they need it, so that it's available for decisions and for other records management purposes. The self-assessment scores are also given to agencies individually. They get an individual score report so they can see which parts of the assessment they are doing well in. The RMSA is divided into several categories. We've got sections of it that deal specifically with records disposition, specifically with internal controls for a records management program, the training program, and an entire section on how well they're handling their electronic records. What the agencies get back in their individual score report will tell them where they are doing well and where they may need to put more resources. So this way they can, instead of taking their limited resources and putting it into everything, they can figure out certain parts what they need to work on for the coming year. We have talked to several agencies that tell us that they are using the RMSA in this fashion. The RMSA reports are also published to the website.
How does the RMSA work and what information is expected from agencies in response?
The RMSA, as we mentioned previously, is a questionnaire. We send out a link to a survey tool to the records officers and any other component records personnel that they have asked to complete the questionnaire. The questionnaire stays open for a period of time. It usually consists of about 50 questions or so. There are some questions that are very direct yes/no questions, and there may be some follow-up information on a question. Should the agency answer no, we may ask why they're not doing a certain thing, give them a chance to comment on things that they may have in progress that doesn't lead them to a yes answer right away. We also look at information that a records officer may have to work with other parts of their agency to get the answer. So a records officer may have to gather information from their agency's information officers, their technology people, some of their program staff in order to ask the questions. But we ask questions initially, does your agency have a person designated to be in charge of the records management program? Usually this is the records officer. We ask whether they have a training program for their own records personnel, and if they also have a training program for all of their staff. We will ask questions on how they are ensuring electronic records are preserved for the entire length of their retention schedule. We ask about their transfer to permanent records. We also specifically ask how long it's been since they've submitted a retention request for disposition authority to the National Archives, so that we know that they are continually scheduling new records as they find unscheduled records and getting them scheduled. We use the information to then figure out trends that are going on in federal agencies so that we can develop and improve our guidance to federal agencies, and which agencies may need more specific attention in some areas than others. We also use the RMSA scores as one of the criteria for an inspection.
What does NARA do with the information it collects from the RMSA?
The information is put into a summary report that usually comes out a little over a year after the inspection. Agencies do get their scores individually right away, but the comprehensive report usually comes out the following year. We develop findings and recommendations based on an analysis of all of the answers that we get. So if we find that a certain percentage of agencies are not doing well in a certain area, we may do a recommendation for further guidance in that area. We may look again for things that are going well, what agencies say that they are doing well at, so that we can highlight that as well.
How can the information collected from the RMSA also benefit the records management programs of the agencies participating?
The RMSA, as I mentioned previously, is divided up into different sections. So, and each section receives a section score, and then we total it all up for the points on 0 to 100. So an agency who gets their individual score report back can then look at that they're doing well, say, in the records disposition area, but perhaps they need a better training program or need to improve in another area. This way, agencies can take their resources and say, okay, we're doing really well in this area, so we don't have to develop plans to improve that area or put as much resources in that area as we may need to in another area. We've talked to many of the agencies who take the self-assessment, and they're finding it a useful tool in developing their budget plans, their work plans for improvement, and so that they can concentrate their limited resources in a particular area.
As supervisor of NARA's Records Management Oversight Team, how do you think records inspections and self-assessments, whether conducted by NARA or the agency itself, contribute to better federal records management, either at the agency, program, or individual office level?
In order to ensure that any records management program, or any program for that matter, is being effective, you have to develop a method to verify the results of that program. Inspections, evaluations, and the self-assessment help agencies look at their program, look at the policies and procedures that they've put in place, and determine whether or not they are being implemented properly, whether they are working. The regulations and statutes dealing with records management are out there for a reason. The regulations guiding federal agencies on which records they need to keep, how long they need to keep them, what they have to do in order to ensure that their information is available for good decision making, being able to prove that they're spending money effectively, all of the reasons that we need information in the first place. You have to know what you have in order to manage it. And one way to determine if your agency's personnel are following the policies that your agencies put out is to do an inspection. For NARA to come in and do an inspection generally boosts the profile of the records management department in that agency while we're doing the inspection. Some of our findings and recommendations can help enforce some of what the records management program has been trying to do. Sometimes it helps to have an outsider come in and look at your program. NARA has a very small staff, so it's also incumbent to records officers to develop evaluations of their own programs. The self-assessment that we do every year with federal agencies is a good starting point. It gives them a core set of questions that they have to answer, and in order to answer them, they also need to go out and find out what's being done outside of their own little office, what's going on in the regional offices, what's going on in the program offices. So doing the self-assessment that we put out, the RMSA, is a starting point for federal agencies. I feel that the inspections that we do, plus the RMSA, is a good starting point for an agency. It helps them identify what problems they may need to be working on. For the National Archives, doing inspections and the self-assessment gives us a trend analysis that we can do to see if the guidance and policies that we've put out are being implemented effectively, and if we need to change what we're doing or do some additional guidance and additional work in certain agencies or in the federal agency community as a whole, depending on how certain answers come out of the self-assessment.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cindy.
Thank you for having me.